The gunshot echoed through the valley as Fiona Campbell crouched behind the overturned wagon, her heart pounding wildly against her ribs. Blood soaked through her tattered dress sleeve, the wound stinging with every labored breath she took. This wasn't how she'd imagined her new life in Colorado territory would begin, running for her life across the unforgiving landscape of 1875. "Miss, take cover!" A deep voice called out as another shot ricocheted off the wooden wheel near her head. Through the dust and confusion, she glimpsed him, a tall figure on horseback, revolver drawn, his face partially obscured by a dusty bandana. He dismounted in one fluid motion, rushing to her side as bullets continued to fly overhead. "Can you ride?" he asked, his blue eyes assessing her quickly. Fiona nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. The stranger helped her to her feet, his strong hand steady as he guided her toward his horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion that seemed unnervingly calm amid the chaos. "Preston Kane," he said simply, lifting her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. "And we need to move fast." The horse surged forward, powerful legs eating up the distance as they fled the ambush site. Fiona felt Preston's arm secure around her waist, his body shielding hers as they rode. Behind them, angry shouts faded into the distance, but she knew they weren't safe, not by a long shot. "They'll follow," she managed to say, her voice barely audible over the thundering hooves. "Not where we're headed," Preston replied, steering the horse up a rocky path that would be nearly impossible to track. As they crested the ridge, Fiona caught sight of the town they were leaving behind, Silvercliff, the place that was supposed to be her salvation after fleeing Boston. Instead, it had become her nightmare. "I can't go back there," she said, tears welling in her eyes as she stared at the distant rooftops. The cowboy whispered, his breath warm against her ear, "Then we'll ride anywhere but back." And in that moment, with danger at their heels and uncertainty ahead, Fiona felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. They rode until the horse needed rest, finding shelter in a small canyon as twilight painted the Colorado sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple. Preston helped Fiona dismount, his hands lingering at her waist longer than necessary, though neither acknowledged it. "Let me take a look at that wound," he said, gesturing toward her bloodied sleeve. Fiona hesitated. "It's just a graze. Even grazes can fester out here." His tone left no room for argument. "I've got supplies in my saddlebag." As Preston tended to her arm with surprisingly gentle hands, Fiona studied him. He wasn't what she'd expected from the cowboys she'd read about in dime novels back east. His face was weathered but handsome, with lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. Despite his rugged appearance, there was something refined about the way he spoke and moved. "You're not from around here," she observed. A slight smile touched his lips. "Neither are you, Miss Campbell. How do you?" "I was in the telegraph office when your message arrived last month." Hard to forget a name when the whole town's been talking about the Boston schoolteacher coming to civilize Silvercliff's youth. Fiona winced, both from the sting of the whiskey he poured over her wound and the reminder of her failed plans. "Some civilizing influence I turned out to be. Want to tell me why Judge Harmon's men were trying to put bullets in you instead of welcoming you to town?" Preston finished bandaging her arm and sat back on his heels. The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Judge Harmon controlled everything in Silvercliff: the mine, the law, even the church. Crossing him was tantamount to signing your own death warrant. "I witnessed something I shouldn't have," Fiona said carefully. "Something that would ruin the judge if it came to light." Preston's expression darkened. "The shooting at the saloon," she nodded, surprised. "You know about that?" "I know Harmon's son killed a man in cold blood, and I know the judge has been silencing witnesses." His jaw tightened. "I didn't realize you were one of them. I arrived in town yesterday, was walking to my boarding house when I heard the commotion." Fiona shuddered at the memory. "I saw it all from across the street, Vincent Harmon shooting that miner in the back, the judge arriving minutes later, ordering his men to clean it up when they spotted me." She trailed off. Preston stood, pacing the small area where they'd made camp. "Harmon won't stop looking for you. You've got information that could hang his only son. What about you? Why are you helping me? You could be killed for interfering." Something flashed in Preston's eyes: anger, determination, or perhaps something deeper. "Let's just say the judge and I have unfinished business. I've been tracking his operations for months." "You're not just a cowboy, are you?" Preston's laugh held little humor. "I herd cattle when needed, break horses when paid, and track men when required." He paused. "I used to wear a badge back in Kansas. Old habits die hard." As night fell completely, they built a small, smokeless fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across Preston's face as he outlined their options, none of which seemed particularly promising. "We could head to Denver, but Harmon's influence reaches there too. North to Wyoming territory might be safer, but it's rough country, especially with winter coming." Fiona wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the chill of the night air and the weight of her circumstances. "I have nothing. No money, no possessions. Everything I owned was in my trunk at the boarding house." Preston reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather pouch. "I've got enough to get us supplies and horses. After that." He shrugged. "I know places where Harmon can't reach us, at least not easily." "Us?" Fiona questioned, raising an eyebrow. "You don't have to risk your life for me beyond today, Mr. Kane." "Preston," he corrected. "And I'm already involved, Miss Campbell. Besides, a woman traveling alone in this territory might as well paint a target on her back." She wanted to argue but knew he was right. Out here, a woman without protection was vulnerable to dangers far beyond Judge Harmon's reach. "Fiona," she offered in return, "if we're to be traveling companions, you might as well use my given name." Something shifted between them in that moment, a tentative trust forming in the unlikeliest of circumstances. As they settled in for the night, Preston taking first watch, Fiona found herself studying his profile against the starlit sky. "Thank you," she whispered, not sure if he could hear, "for saving my life today." He turned slightly, his expression softening. "Get some sleep, Fiona. Tomorrow will come soon enough, and we've got a long road ahead." She closed her eyes, exhaustion finally claiming her, but not before she registered the strange flutter in her chest at the way he'd said her name, like it was something precious, something worth protecting. Morning arrived with a spectacular sunrise and the distant sound of horses. Preston was already packed and ready, having let Fiona sleep through his watch. "Riders," he explained tersely, helping her mount up. "Could be nothing, but we can't take chances." They rode hard through the morning, following game trails and dry creek beds to mask their tracks. Preston seemed to know this land intimately, navigating the treacherous terrain with confidence that Fiona found both impressive and reassuring. By midday, they reached a small trading post run by an elderly man Preston introduced as Morris. The old man eyed Fiona suspiciously, but asked no questions when Preston purchased supplies, an extra horse, and women's clothing. "Harmon's men were through here yesterday," Morris mentioned casually as he counted Preston's money. "Asking about a woman matching your companion's description." Preston's hand moved subtly toward his gun. "What did you tell them?" Morris snorted. "That I haven't seen a woman under 60 in 3 months. They didn't believe me, but they moved on." He glanced at Fiona. "Whatever trouble you're in, miss, stick with Kane. He's one of the good ones." As they prepared to leave, Fiona changed into the practical riding clothes Preston had purchased: a simple blouse, split skirt, and sturdy boots. When she emerged from behind the trading post, she caught Preston staring. "Is something wrong?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. He cleared his throat. "No, you look more prepared for the journey now," Morris chuckled behind them. "What the cowboy means to say is that you look mighty fine, miss." Preston shot the old man a warning glance before mounting his horse. "We should reach the cabin by nightfall if we keep a good pace." They rode northwest, leaving the main trails behind and venturing into increasingly wild country. As they traveled, Preston shared bits of his past growing up on a Kansas farm, joining the cavalry during the final years of the war, later becoming a lawman. He spoke little of what had brought him to Colorado, and Fiona didn't press. In turn, she told him about her life in Boston, the death of her parents that had left her alone at 22, and her decision to accept the teaching position in Silvercliff. "I wanted adventure," she admitted with a rueful smile, "to see the West before settling into spinsterhood." "Spinsterhood?" Preston looked genuinely surprised. "Surely you had suitors back east?" Fiona laughed. "Oh, I had offers. Sons of my father's business associates, mostly men who saw me as a convenient addition to their family connections. Nothing that resembled love." "And that's what you're looking for? Love?" There was something in his voice she couldn't quite identify. "I'm looking for a life that means something," she replied after a moment. "Love would be a welcome addition." Their eyes met briefly before Preston looked away, focusing on the path ahead. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged with something new, a mutual awareness that had nothing to do with their dangerous circumstances. As the sun began its descent, they came upon a small cabin nestled against the side of a forested mountain. It was simple but sturdy looking, with a corral for horses and a small stream nearby. "My father built this place years ago," Preston explained as he helped Fiona dismount. "He came out here during the first gold rushes, made enough to go back to Kansas and buy our farm. Kept this place as a reminder of his adventures, I suppose." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly comfortable. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, rough-hewn furniture filled the main room, and a curtain separated a small sleeping area. "Not exactly what you're used to in Boston," Preston said as he lit the lamps. Fiona ran her hand over the simple wooden table. "It's perfect, safe. For now," he cautioned. "We'll stay here a few days, let things cool down, then figure out our next move." He gestured toward the curtained area. "You take the bed. I'll sleep out here." As night fell, Preston built a fire while Fiona prepared a simple meal from their supplies. The domesticity of the scene struck her as they sat together, eating, how quickly circumstances had thrown them into an intimacy that would have been scandalous in Boston society. "Tell me more about Judge Harmon," she said as they finished their meal. "What's your connection to him?" Preston was quiet for so long that Fiona thought he might not answer. Finally, he stood and retrieved a small wooden box from his saddlebag. "2 years ago, I was tracking a gang that had robbed a bank in Denver. The trail led me to Silvercliff." He opened the box and removed a tarnished star-shaped badge. "I was working with the territorial marshals by then. When I started asking questions about strangers in town, I found myself arrested on false charges." "Harmon's doing," Preston nodded grimly. "He had me beaten, stripped of my badge, and run out of town. Told me he'd hang me if I ever returned." His fingers tightened around the badge. "I later discovered the bank robbers were working for Harmon, moving money from his illegal operations through legitimate banks." "And you've been gathering evidence against him since then," Fiona concluded. "Yes, but he's careful, connected. The territorial governor is his cousin by marriage. Preston's expression hardened. What you witnessed his son murdering that miner is the first direct evidence linking the Harmons to a capital crime. Fiona suddenly understood the gravity of her situation. I'm not just a witness. I'm your case against Harmon. You're a woman who deserves justice and protection, Preston corrected firmly. If you choose to testify, I'll make sure you have both. If not, he shrugged, we'll find somewhere safe for you to start over. The choice hung between them: justice at great personal risk, or safety at the cost of letting a murderer go free. Neither option felt right. What would you do? She asked softly. Preston's blue eyes met hers across the firelight. I've spent 2 years pursuing justice against Harmon. But I wouldn't ask anyone else to take the risks I've chosen. His honesty touched her. Most men would have pressured her, used her vulnerability to further their own goals. Instead, he was offering her a choice, a rare gift in a world where women's choices were often made for them. I need time to think, she said finally. We have a few days, he assured her. Get some rest. Things often look clearer in the morning. That night, as Fiona lay in the small bed listening to Preston's steady breathing from the main room, she found herself thinking not just of her testimony and Harmon's crimes, but of the man who had risked his life to save hers. There was something about Preston Kane that called to her: his quiet strength, his sense of justice, the gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. It was foolish to develop feelings in such circumstances, she told herself. And yet, as sleep finally claimed her, it was his face she saw behind her closed eyelids. The next 3 days established a routine of sorts. They tended the horses, hunted for fresh meat, and repaired what needed fixing around the cabin. Preston taught Fiona to shoot his spare revolver, patiently correcting her stance and grip until she could hit the targets he set up consistently. You're a natural, he praised after she shot a can off a stump at 20 paces. I had good motivation to learn, she replied, but smiled at his compliment nonetheless. In the evenings, they talked for hours by the fire. Preston told stories of his adventures tracking outlaws across the territories, while Fiona shared tales of her students in Boston and the books she loved. There were moments when their hands would accidentally touch, or their eyes would meet for just a beat too long, and Fiona would feel that same flutter in her chest. On the 4th night, as a storm raged outside the cabin, Preston finally asked the question that had been hovering between them. Have you decided about testifying? Fiona set down the shirt she'd been mending, one of Preston's that had torn during their escape. Yes, I can't let Vincent Harmon get away with murder, no matter the risk to myself. Preston's expression was a mix of admiration and concern. It won't be easy. We'll need to reach a federal marshal, someone beyond Harmon's influence. That means crossing the mountains before the heavy snows come. When do we leave? 2 days. There's a supply station at Red Creek Pass where we can rest and resupply before heading to Denver. He hesitated. Fiona, once you testify, your life will never be the same. The Harmons have allies everywhere. She met his gaze steadily. My life already changed the moment I saw Vincent pull that trigger. I can't unsee it, can't unfeel the responsibility. Preston reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The touch sent warmth spiraling through her. Whatever happens, you won't face it alone, he promised. They sat like that for a long moment, hands joined, the only sounds the crackling fire and the rain pounding on the roof. When Preston finally pulled away, Fiona felt the loss of his touch like a physical thing. That night, she dreamed of him, of strong arms holding her close, of blue eyes looking at her with something more than concern or duty. She woke flushed and confused, trying to remind herself that their connection was born of circumstance. not choice. Yet as she watched him the next morning, chopping wood in the clearing beside the cabin, shirt damp with exertion and face set in concentration, Fiona couldn't deny the truth any longer. Against all logic and propriety, she was falling for Preston Kane. Their preparations to leave intensified. Preston checked and rechecked their weapons, plotted their route on a worn map, and taught Fiona basic survival skills she might need in the mountains. "If we get separated for any reason," he explained, showing her how to use a compass, "head north-northeast. Keep the morning sun on your right shoulder." "You're worried they'll find us," she observed. "I'm preparing for possibilities," he corrected. "That's how you stay alive out here." On their final evening at the cabin, Preston returned from hunting with a pair of rabbits. As they prepared the meal together, Fiona found herself studying his profile in the fading daylight, the strong line of his jaw, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "You're staring," he said without looking up from the rabbit he was skinning. Fiona blushed. "I was just thinking about how different my life would be if you hadn't been in Silvercliff that day." "Probably shorter," he said dryly. "That's not what I meant." She set down the herbs she'd been chopping. "Preston, I need to thank you properly, not just for saving my life but for respecting my choices, for treating me as an equal." He looked up then, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me for treating you as you deserve to be treated. In my experience, men like you are rare, men like me." There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Honorable men, kind men." She paused. "Men who see women as more than decorative accessories or burdens to be managed." Preston set aside his knife and stood, moving closer until they were separated by mere inches. "Fiona," he began, then seemed to struggle with his words. "I want you to know that whatever happens when we leave here tomorrow," a gunshot shattered the moment, the bullet splintering the doorframe beside them. Preston reacted instantly, pulling Fiona to the floor as more shots followed. "Harmon's men," he hissed, reaching for his rifle. "They must have tracked us to the trading post." Fiona's heart hammered in her chest. "How many? Can't tell. At least 3, maybe more." Preston crawled to the window, peering cautiously outside. "They've got us surrounded, but they're keeping their distance. They know I'm armed." "What do we do?" Preston's mind worked quickly. "There's a cellar trapdoor under the rug by the fireplace. My father built it as a hideout during Indian raids. It leads to a tunnel that comes out near the creek." "You want me to escape while you stay and fight," Fiona realized, her stomach dropping. "I want us both to live through this," he countered. "I'll hold them off, create a diversion, then follow you." Before she could argue, another volley of bullets hit the cabin. One shattered the window, sending glass flying. Preston pulled Fiona toward the fireplace, throwing back the rug to reveal the trapdoor. "Take this." He pressed his spare revolver into her hands. "Head northeast like I showed you. There's an old mining camp about 5 miles from here. Wait for me there. Preston, I can't leave you." He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense in the fading light. "You have to. You're the witness, the one who matters." And then, before she could process what was happening, he kissed her a brief, fierce kiss that left her breathless. When he pulled away, his expression was determined. "That's in case I don't make it to the mining camp," he said quietly. "Now go." Stunned by both the kiss and the situation, Fiona let him help her into the cellar. The last thing she saw before he closed the trapdoor was Preston checking his rifle, his face set in grim resolve. The tunnel was low and narrow, forcing Fiona to crouch as she followed it by feel in the near-complete darkness. She tried not to think about the spiders and other creatures that might inhabit such a place, focusing instead on moving forward, on surviving. Behind her, she could hear the muffled sounds of gunfire intensifying. The thought of Preston alone against multiple assailants made her stomach clench with fear, but she pressed on, knowing that was what he wanted. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, though in reality it was probably no more than 100 yards. Finally, Fiona felt cool air on her face and saw a faint lightening ahead. She emerged into the twilight beside the creek, concealed by a thicket of willows. From this position, she could see the cabin and the men surrounding it, 5 riders, their horses tethered behind a rocky outcropping. They were firing steadily at the cabin, and Preston was returning fire from different windows, making it seem like there were multiple defenders. It was a clever tactic, but it couldn't last. Eventually, they would realize he was alone, or they would simply rush the cabin from multiple sides. Fiona knew she should run, should follow Preston's instructions and head for the mining camp. It was the logical choice, the safe choice. But as she watched another barrage of bullets hit the cabin, something inside her rebelled at the thought of leaving him. Moving carefully through the underbrush, she circled toward the horses. If she could scatter them, it might create enough confusion for Preston to gain an advantage. It was risky if spotted. She would be an easy target, but she couldn't simply abandon the man who had saved her life. The man who had come to mean so much to her in such a short time. Reaching the horses without being seen took agonizing minutes of careful movement. The animals were nervous from the gunfire, stamping and snorting. Fiona approached the first one cautiously, then fired Preston's revolver into the air. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The horses reared and bolted, breaking their ties and scattering in all directions. The attackers shouted in confusion, some running after their mounts while others turned to locate the source of the new threat. Fiona ducked down, crawling through the underbrush toward a fallen log that offered better cover. She had just reached it when a bullet splintered the wood inches from her head. "There she is," a voice shouted. The girl. 2 men advanced toward her position, guns drawn. Fiona raised Preston's revolver with shaking hands, remembering his lessons. She fired twice in rapid succession. The first shot went wild, but the second caught one of the men in the shoulder, spinning him around with a cry of pain. From the cabin, she heard renewed gunfire. Preston had spotted her diversion and was taking advantage of it, focusing his fire on the men approaching her position. One fell, clutching his leg, while the other dove for cover behind a boulder. In the confusion, Fiona saw Preston emerge from the cabin, moving low and fast toward the tree line. Relief flooded through her, only to turn to horror as one of the attackers spotted him and raised his rifle. "Preston!" She screamed in warning. He dropped and rolled as the shot rang out, returning fire from a prone position. The attacker jerked backward, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the air as he fell. Now it was 2 against 2, Preston against the man behind the boulder, Fiona against the one she'd wounded in the shoulder, who was now trying to flank her position. She tracked him through the trees, waiting until he was exposed before firing again. Her bullet grazed his side enough to make him curse and retreat. Then Preston was beside her, his expression a mixture of anger and admiration. "I told you to run," he hissed, pulling her deeper into cover as bullets thudded into the log. "I couldn't leave you," she replied simply. Something flashed in his eyes, frustration, certainly, but something else too. Before he could respond, more shots peppered their position. "We need to move," Preston decided. "Head for the creek. I'll cover you." This time Fiona obeyed. She ran in a crouch toward the water, diving into the protective cover of the willow thickets as Preston laid down covering fire. Moments later he joined her, and together they waded into the shallow creek, using the water to mask their trail as they moved downstream. Behind them, the shooting had stopped. The remaining attackers were either regrouping or tending to their wounded. Either way, it gave Preston and Fiona precious minutes to put distance between themselves and danger. They traveled through the night, following the creek until it joined a larger stream, then heading northeast across increasingly rugged terrain. Fiona's city-bred body protested the punishing pace, but she refused to slow Preston down, pushing through exhaustion and pain. Dawn found them high on a forested slope, looking down at the valley they'd left behind. No signs of pursuit were visible, but Preston remained vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning their back trail. "We should rest," he finally conceded, guiding Fiona to a sheltered hollow beneath a rocky overhang. "Just for a few hours." As the adrenaline of their escape faded, the reality of their situation set in. They had lost their horses, most of their supplies, and the relative safety of the cabin. All they had were their weapons, the clothes on their backs, and whatever Preston had managed to grab before fleeing. "I'm sorry," Fiona said as they huddled together for warmth. "If I hadn't tried to help, you saved my life," Preston interrupted. "That last man would have had me dead to rights if you hadn't created that diversion with the horses. Still, we've lost everything." "Not everything." He looked at her intently. "You're still alive, I'm still alive, and you're still willing to testify. That's what matters." Fiona was suddenly acutely aware of how close they were sitting, of the warmth of his body against hers. The memory of his kiss before they'd separated flashed through her mind. "Preston, about what happened before I went into the tunnel," she began hesitantly. His expression became carefully neutral. "I shouldn't have done that. It was presumptuous." "No, it wasn't." Fiona gathered her courage. "In fact, I've been wanting you to do that since. Well, for longer than I should admit." Preston's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "Fiona," he said, her name almost a caress on his lips, "you should know that I've never met anyone like you. Your courage, your determination," he broke off, seemingly struggling with words. "But," she prompted, sensing his hesitation, "but our circumstances are complicated, dangerous. And once we reach Denver, once you testify." He trailed off. "Once I testify, I'll need to build a new life somewhere," she finished for him. "Is that a journey you'd consider sharing?" The question hung between them, bold and vulnerable. For a moment, Fiona feared she'd been too forward, had misread his interest. Then Preston's hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "There's nothing I'd want more," he admitted quietly. "But I need you to be sure. Life with me wouldn't be easy. I've made enemies beyond Harmon, and I can't promise the kind of comfort you knew in Boston." Fiona laughed softly. "Comfort? Preston, I've been shot at, chased across the wilderness, and am currently hiding in a hollow wearing clothes I've worn for days. If I were seeking comfort, I'd have married one of those Boston businessmen." A smile tugged at his lips. "When you put it that way. What I want," she continued, suddenly serious, "is a life that means something, with someone who sees me as I am, someone brave and kind and honorable." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Someone like you." In response, Preston leaned forward and kissed her again, not the desperate, rushed kiss of their earlier parting, but something deeper, more tender. Fiona melted into it, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, then his hair. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "We should try to sleep," he murmured. "We've got a long journey ahead." They settled together beneath the overhang, Preston's arm protective around Fiona's waist. Despite their precarious situation, she felt safer than she had in days, lulled by the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Preston," she whispered, already half asleep. I'm glad I can't go back to Silvercliff." She felt rather than saw his smile. "Then we'll ride anywhere but back," he promised, echoing his words from their first meeting, words that now held new meaning, new promise. Sleep claimed them both, a brief respite before the challenges ahead. The next 2 days tested them both. Without horses, they were forced to travel on foot through increasingly difficult terrain. Game was scarce, and they rationed the few supplies Preston had managed to grab: some jerky, a canteen, matches, and ammunition. Fiona's city shoes, already unsuitable for wilderness travel, fell apart completely on the second day. Preston fashioned crude moccasins from a rabbit they'd managed to trap, but her feet remained painful and blistered. Yet through it all, something beautiful was growing between them. Each hardship seemed to strengthen rather than diminish their bond. They shared stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. In the evenings, they would sit close together by their small fire, sometimes talking late into the night, other times simply enjoying a companionable silence. And there were kisses, sweet, tender moments stolen amid their flight, affirmations that what they felt was real despite the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. On the third morning after their escape from the cabin, they reached the old mining camp Preston had mentioned. It had been abandoned for years, but several structures remained standing, including a small office building with an intact roof. "We'll rest here today," Preston decided, noting Fiona's exhaustion and the angry red blisters on her feet. "The supply station at Red Creek Pass is only a day's journey from here, but you need to heal a bit before we attempt it." Inside the office, they found a rusty stove that still functioned well enough to provide heat. Preston managed to hunt a pair of squirrels, and they feasted on what felt like a magnificent meal after days of near starvation. As Fiona sat by the stove, letting Preston tend to her feet with gentle hands, she couldn't help but reflect on how much her life had changed in just over a week. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That if someone had told me 2 weeks ago that I'd be sitting in an abandoned mining camp, falling in love with a former lawman while fleeing for my life, I'd have thought them utterly mad." Preston's hand stilled. "Falling in love," he repeated, his voice carefully neutral. Fiona realized what she'd said and blushed deeply. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, Fiona." He moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "You could never make me uncomfortable. And if we're being honest with each other," he took a deep breath, "I think I started falling in love with you the moment you said you couldn't go back to Silvercliff, and I promised we'd ride anywhere but back." The simple confession, spoken so earnestly, brought tears to Fiona's eyes. "Even though I've brought nothing but trouble into your life," Preston laughed softly. "My life was full of trouble long before you entered it, but it wasn't full of you." He reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face. "And now that it is, I can't imagine it any other way." Their kiss was different this time, deeper, more certain, filled with the acknowledgement of feelings too powerful to be denied. When Preston finally pulled away, his breathing was uneven, his eyes dark with emotion. "When we reach Denver," he said, voice rough, "after you've given your testimony and we're safe, I'd like to court you properly, if you'll allow it." Fiona smiled, heart full. "I'd like nothing more." They spent the rest of the day recovering their strength and planning their route to Red Creek Pass. The supply station there was run by a friend of Preston's, someone he trusted to help them arrange transportation to Denver. "Once we reach the pass, the worst will be behind us," Preston assured her. "From there, it's well-traveled roads to Denver." That night, they slept peacefully for the first time in days, secure in both their temporary shelter and their newly confessed feelings. Fiona dreamed not of danger and pursuit, but of a future with Preston by her side, a future that, while uncertain, felt full of promise. Morning brought renewed determination. Fiona's feet, while still tender, were improved enough for travel. They set out at dawn, Preston setting a steady pace that would bring them to the pass by evening if all went well. The journey was arduous but beautiful. Fall had turned the aspen groves to gold, and the mountain air was crisp and invigorating. They talked as they walked, making plans for their arrival in Denver, speculating about where they might settle afterward. "I could teach again," Fiona suggested. "Or perhaps work in a library. I've always loved books." "Wyoming might be good," Preston mused. "It's still wild enough that Harmon's influence wouldn't reach there easily, but settled enough for schools and such. I could ranch, maybe raise horses." The domesticity of their conversation struck Fiona as sweetly incongruous given their circumstances, two people fleeing for their lives, discussing a shared future as naturally as if they were courting in a Boston parlor. By mid-afternoon, they had reached the final approach to Red Creek Pass. The trail narrowed, winding between massive boulders with the creek rushing below. Preston helped Fiona navigate the difficult terrain, his hand steady and sure when she needed support. They were less than a mile from the pass when Preston suddenly tensed, his hand flying to his gun. "What is it?" Fiona whispered, instantly alert. "Smoke." He pointed to a thin column rising beyond the pass, from the direction of the supply station. Something in his tone sent a chill through Fiona. "That's not normal. Henry keeps his chimney clear. That smoke's too dark, too thick." Preston's expression darkened. "Stay here. I'm going to scout ahead." "No," Fiona caught his arm. "We stay together. If there's danger, we face it together." Preston looked like he wanted to argue but nodded reluctantly. "Stay behind me then and be ready to run if I say so." They moved forward cautiously, leaving the trail to approach through the trees. As they neared the supply station, the smell of burning wood grew stronger. From their elevated position, they could finally see the source of the smoke. The station itself was burning, flames consuming the wooden structure while several men on horseback watched from a distance. "Harmon's men," Preston hissed, recognizing one of the riders. "They got here ahead of us, probably hoping to catch us when we arrived." Fiona's heart sank. "What about your friend?" Preston's jaw tightened. "I don't see Henry. He might have escaped into the hills. He knows this area better than anyone. What do we do now?" Preston studied the scene, thinking quickly. "They're expecting us to come up the main trail. We'll circle around, head west toward Miller's Crossing. It's a longer route to Denver but less traveled." "Can we make it? Without supplies?" Fiona asked, worried. "We have to." Preston's eyes met hers, resolute. "I'm not letting them stop us, Fiona. Not when we're so close." They retreated carefully, keeping to the trees until they were well away from the burning station. Preston led them on a steep detour through a series of ravines, moving as quickly as Fiona's injured feet would allow. The sun was setting when disaster struck. As they crossed a particularly rocky stretch, Fiona's makeshift moccasin caught on a stone, sending her tumbling down a short but steep embankment. She landed hard, a cry of pain escaping her lips as her ankle twisted beneath her. Preston was at her side instantly. "Can you move it?" he asked, carefully examining the rapidly swelling joint. Fiona tried and winced. "A little. It's not broken, I don't think, but I can't put weight on it." The implications were clear. Their progress would be severely slowed if not halted entirely, and with Harmon's men so close behind. "You should go on without me," Fiona said, voicing what she knew Preston must be thinking. "Get to Denver, bring back help." The look he gave her was one of such profound disbelief that she almost laughed despite the pain. "That's not happening," he stated flatly. "Preston, be reasonable. I'll only slow you down. Find somewhere to hide me, then come back once you've reached safety." "No." The single word was final, brooking no argument. "We started this journey together and we'll finish it together." He surveyed their surroundings. "We need shelter for the night." There's a rock outcropping about 100 yards ahead. Should provide some cover while I figure out our next move." Without further discussion, he lifted Fiona into his arms. She started to protest that she could hop with his support, but the determined set of his jaw silenced her. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck and let him carry her to the shelter he'd spotted. The outcropping turned out to be a shallow cave, deep enough to protect them from the elements, but not so deep as to harbor animals. Preston settled Fiona carefully against the back wall, then used the last of their daylight to gather wood for a small fire. As darkness fell, he bound her ankle with strips torn from his own shirt, his touch gentle despite his grim expression. "It's not as bad as it looks," he assured her, though Fiona suspected he was being optimistic for her benefit. "Rest it tonight, and by morning you might be able to put some weight on it." They ate the last of their food, a few strips of jerky, and shared the remaining water in their canteen. The situation was dire, but as they sat close together in the firelight, Fiona found she couldn't regret the journey that had brought them here. "I was thinking," she said after a comfortable silence, "about what you said yesterday, about courting me properly in Denver." Preston smiled, some of the tension leaving his face. "What about it? I think we're well beyond conventional courting, don't you? After all, we've already survived gunfights together, shared a cabin, spent nights in each other's arms." "Your Boston friends would be scandalized," he agreed with a soft laugh. "Thoroughly." She took his hand, suddenly serious. "What I'm trying to say is, when we reach Denver, I don't want to pretend we're just beginning. Whatever happens with my testimony, however long it takes to feel safe again, I want us to face it together. Not as people who are courting, but as partners." Preston's eyes widened slightly, understanding dawning. "Fiona Campbell, are you proposing to me?" She blushed but held his gaze steadily. "I suppose I am. It's terribly forward of me, isn't it?" "Terribly," he agreed, but his voice was tender. "And entirely welcome." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Yes, Fiona, I would be honored to be your husband whenever and however you'll have me." The simplicity of his acceptance, free from any hint of surprise at her boldness or concern about propriety, confirmed everything Fiona loved about this man. In Preston Kane, she had found someone who valued her mind and spirit as much as her heart. Their kiss sealed the promise, a commitment made not in a church or before witnesses, but in a mountain cave with danger at their heels. Somehow, it felt more sacred for all that. They spent the night planning their future, the small ranch they might build in Wyoming, the school where Fiona might teach, the children they hoped to have. For a few precious hours, they allowed themselves to dream beyond their current peril, to believe in the life that awaited them if they could just reach Denver safely. Morning brought both challenge and opportunity. Fiona's ankle, while still painful, had improved enough that she could walk with support, and Preston, scouting the area at dawn, discovered fresh horse tracks nearby. "Riders came through late yesterday," he reported, "heading away from the pass toward Miller's Crossing. Could be travelers, could be more of Harmon's men spreading out to search for us. Or it could be our chance," Fiona suggested, an idea forming. "If they're camped nearby, we might be able to borrow a horse." Preston raised an eyebrow, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Miss Campbell, are you suggesting we steal, borrow?" she corrected primly. "In our dire circumstances, I believe even the strictest moral code would allow for borrowing transportation." His smile widened. "I've been a bad influence on you." "The very worst," she agreed cheerfully. "Now help me up. If we're going to become horse thieves, we should get started." Following the tracks led them to a small camp about a mile away. 3 men were just beginning to stir, their horses tethered at the edge of the clearing. From their hidden vantage point, Preston and Fiona studied the situation. Not Harmon's men, Preston whispered, noting their civilian clothing and relaxed demeanor. "Probably miners heading to a new claim." "So we're stealing from innocent men," Fiona said with a frown. Preston squeezed her hand reassuringly. "We'll leave them my pocket watch. It's solid silver worth more than any horse, and we'll only take one mount between us. They'll be inconvenienced, not stranded." The plan was simple but risky. Preston would create a diversion on one side of the camp, while Fiona, despite her injured ankle, would untether the horse farthest from the men's position. If all went well, they'd be mounted and away before the miners fully realized what was happening. Preston left his watch prominently placed on a rock near where the horse had been tied, along with a hastily scribbled note explaining their desperate circumstances and promising to leave the horse at the livery in Denver. "Ready?" he asked Fiona, who nodded despite her obvious nervousness. Preston circled to the far side of the camp and waited until all three men were occupied with their breakfast before creating his diversion, a series of loud crashes and rustling in the underbrush that immediately drew their attention. Fiona moved as quickly as her injured ankle allowed, reaching the horses and untying a sturdy-looking bay. The animal was cooperative, allowing her to lead it quietly away from the camp. She had just reached their predetermined meeting point when one of the miners shouted in alarm, having spotted the missing horse. Preston burst from the trees beside her, helping her mount quickly before swinging up behind her. They were galloping away as shots rang out, warning shots fired high, not intended to hit them but to express displeasure at the theft. "Sorry," Preston called back, though they were likely too far away to hear. "Check the rocks by your camp." They rode hard for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and the miners. The bay was strong and sure-footed, handling the mountain trails with ease even under their combined weight. By midday, they had reached Miller's Crossing, a small settlement consisting of little more than a trading post, a saloon, and a handful of cabins. Preston approached cautiously, wary of Harmon's influence, but saw no signs of danger. The trading post owner, a wizened man named Tucker, recognized neither of them and asked no questions when Preston traded his remaining ammunition, and Fiona's Boston-made brooch for supplies. They purchased food, a proper bandage for Fiona's ankle, and a worn but serviceable saddle to replace the bareback riding that was aggravating her injury. "How far to Denver?" Fiona asked as they prepared to depart. 3 days' ride," Tucker informed them. "Roads clear all the way, but watch yourselves near Elk Creek. Been some bandit trouble thereabouts." After bandits and Harmon's men, ordinary road thieves seemed almost quaint, but they thanked him for the warning nonetheless. They rode more leisurely after leaving Miller's Crossing, preserving their horses' strength and allowing Fiona's ankle time to heal. The countryside was changing, less rugged mountain terrain and more rolling foothills as they descended toward the plains where Denver sat. That night, they camped beside a small stream, enjoying the luxury of a proper meal from their purchased supplies. As they sat together after eating, Fiona resting against Preston's chest while he absently stroked her hair, she felt a contentment that seemed miraculous given their circumstances. "What will happen after I testify?" she asked, voicing a concern that had been growing. "Will Harmon be arrested immediately?" Preston sighed. "It's not that simple. He'll have lawyers, connections. There will be a hearing, possibly a trial if the territorial judge thinks there's enough evidence. You may need to testify multiple times, and will be in danger until it's resolved," she concluded. "Yes, but Denver has lawmen who aren't in Harmon's pocket. You'll have protection." He kissed the top of her head. "And you'll have me. What about afterward? Will we really be able to start over somewhere new?" "I've been saving for a place of my own for years," Preston revealed. "I have enough for a small spread in Wyoming, like we discussed. It won't be fancy, but it would be ours." The word ours sent a warm glow through Fiona. "When could we be married?" she asked, practical considerations asserting themselves. "Would we need to wait until after the trial?" Preston considered this. "There's no legal reason to wait, but a wedding might make us easier to track if Harmon sends men after us. So we either postpone our happiness for safety or risk danger for happiness," Fiona mused. "What a choice. There might be a third option." Preston shifted so he could see her face. "We could marry quietly in Denver immediately after you testify. Just us, a preacher, and whatever witnesses we need to make it legal. Then we leave town that same day, heading in an unexpected direction to throw off pursuit." The plan appealed to Fiona's practical nature as much as her romantic heart. "I like that option," she admitted. "Though I've always imagined my wedding with friends and family present. We could have a proper celebration later when it's safe," Preston suggested. "Renew our vows in front of everyone." "Everyone being your friends, since most of mine are back in Boston and unlikely to travel to Wyoming," Fiona pointed out with a small laugh. "You'll make new friends. People will love you as quickly as I did." Preston's tone was so matter-of-fact, so confident in her ability to build a new life, that Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. "How did I get so fortunate?" she wondered aloud. "To find you in the midst of such danger. I've been asking myself the same question." Preston's arms tightened around her. "Maybe some good had to come from all the darkness Harmon created, a balance of sorts." They fell silent, contemplating the strange twists of fate that had brought them together. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Preston suddenly laughed. "What's amusing?" Fiona asked, settling beside him beneath their shared blanket. "I was just thinking about how this all started. You said you couldn't go back to Silvercliff, and I promised we'd ride anywhere but back." He shook his head, smiling. "I had no idea how far anywhere would take us. Are you sorry that you made that promise?" Fiona held her breath, suddenly needing reassurance. Preston's answer was to pull her close, his kiss leaving no doubt about his feelings. "The only thing I'm sorry about," he murmured against her lips, "is that I didn't meet you years ago." Satisfied with his answer, Fiona drifted to sleep in his arms, dreaming of the life they would build together far from Boston, far from Silvercliff, in a place that would be entirely their own. The next 2 days of travel were mercifully uneventful. Fiona's ankle improved enough that riding became comfortable, and they made good progress along the increasingly well-traveled road to Denver. They passed other travelers' freight wagons, mail coaches, solitary riders, but saw no sign of Harmon's men. "You think they've given up?" Fiona asked hopefully as they made camp on their final night before reaching Denver. Preston shook his head. "More likely they're waiting in Denver, watching the roads. Harmon would have telegraphed ahead once he realized we were heading that way." "So how do we enter the city safely?" "We don't enter directly." Preston pointed to their map, indicating a small settlement on Denver's outskirts. "We'll stop here first, at Riverside. I have a friend there, James Merritt, a former marshal I worked with. He can escort us to the territorial offices." The plan was sound, but as they prepared for their final day of travel, Fiona couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. They had come so far, overcome so much it seemed almost too much to hope that they could complete their journey without one final confrontation. Her premonition proved accurate sooner than expected. Midway through the morning, as they rounded a bend in the road, they found their path blocked by 3 mounted men. Even before she could make out their faces, Fiona knew these were Harmon's men. Preston reacted instantly, wheeling their horse around, only to find 2 more riders approaching from behind. They were trapped. "Well, well," called one of the men ahead, a burly figure with a distinctive scar across his cheek. "If it ain't the schoolteacher and her pet lawman. Judge Harmon sends his regards." Preston's arm tightened protectively around Fiona's waist. "Let us pass, Fletcher," he called back, recognizing the leader. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed." Fletcher laughed, the sound ugly in the morning air. "Oh, but it does. The judge was quite specific neither of you reaches Denver alive." Preston's voice dropped to a whisper. "When I say now, slide off to the right and run for those trees. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," Fiona hissed back. "Fiona, please, enough whispering," Fletcher interrupted, drawing his gun. "Time to finish this." What happened next unfolded with the surreal clarity that accompanies moments of extreme danger. As Fletcher raised his weapon, a shot rang out, but not from his gun or Preston's. One of the men behind them cried out and toppled from his saddle. More shots followed in rapid succession. Fletcher jerked backward, blood blooming on his chest. The remaining men scattered, returning fire at unseen assailants in the trees lining the road. "Down!" Preston shouted, pulling Fiona from the saddle and shielding her with his body as bullets whizzed overhead. From the forest emerged a group of mounted men, badges glinting on their chests. Marshals, at least 5 of them, led by a tall figure Fiona recognized from Preston's descriptions as James Merritt. The skirmish was brief but violent. When silence finally fell, 3 of Harmon's men lay dead or wounded on the road. The others had fled into the hills, pursued by 2 of the marshals. Merritt dismounted and strode toward them, relief evident on his weathered face. "Cutting it close, weren't you, Kane?" Preston stood, helping Fiona to her feet. "Your timing is impeccable as always, James." He clasped the marshal's hand warmly. "How did you know we were coming this way?" "Got a telegram from old Henry at Red Creek," Merritt explained. "Said Harmon's men had burned his place looking for you too, and you were likely headed this direction." He tipped his hat to Fiona. "Madam, James Merritt, U.S. Marshal. Pleasure to make your acquaintance, though I wish it were under better circumstances." "The pleasure is mine, Marshal," Fiona replied, still slightly shaken by the sudden violence. "Thank you for your timely intervention." "Let's get you both to Denver," Merritt said, "all business now. Judge Wilson is waiting to take your statement, Miss Campbell. And he's brought in federal authorities. Seems Harmon's crimes extend beyond Colorado territory." They rode into Denver under marshal escort, a procession that drew curious stares from passers-by. Fiona, exhausted from their journey and the morning's confrontation, leaned against Preston's chest, drawing strength from his steady presence. The territorial offices were housed in an imposing brick building in the heart of the growing city. Inside, they were ushered into a private office where Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with kind eyes, waited with 2 federal agents. For the next 3 hours, Fiona recounted everything she had witnessed in Silvercliff, from Vincent Harmon's cold-blooded murder of the minor to Judge Harmon's subsequent cover-up attempt. Preston added his own testimony about Harmon's corruption and illegal activities, presenting evidence he had gathered over the past 2 years. When they finished, Judge Wilson looked grave. "This is more than enough for arrest warrants for both Harmons. The federal agents will depart for Silvercliff immediately." He turned to Fiona. "Miss Campbell, your courage is commendable. Few would risk what you have for justice." "I had help," she said, glancing at Preston with a small smile. "Indeed." The judge's gaze moved between them knowingly. "Marshal Merritt has arranged safe accommodations for you both while we proceed with this case. I must caution you, even with Judge Harmon arrested, his allies may seek retribution. You'll have protection, but you should remain vigilant." As they left the office, Preston pulled Merritt aside for a private conversation while Fiona waited in the anteroom. When he returned, there was a new lightness in his expression. "James knows a minister who can marry us tomorrow," he told her quietly. "And he's arranged for a wagon and supplies for our journey north afterward, if you're still certain." Fiona's answer was to rise on tiptoe and kiss him, heedless of the clerk watching with raised eyebrows. "More certain than I've ever been about anything," she assured him. They were married the following morning in the small chapel, attached to Denver's first schoolhouse, a setting Fiona found perfectly appropriate. She wore a simple blue dress purchased hastily the evening before, while Preston had splurged on a new shirt and had actually visited a barber. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Merritt stood as Preston's witness, while the minister's wife attended Fiona. When Preston placed a modest gold band on her finger, another hasty purchase that nonetheless fit perfectly, Fiona felt tears of joy spill down her cheeks. "I promise to love and protect you all the days of my life," Preston vowed, his voice steady but his eyes suspiciously bright. "To build a home and a life worthy of your courage and your heart." Fiona's own vows were simple but profound. "I promise to stand by you through whatever challenges we face, to create a haven of love wherever we may roam, and to never regret the day I said I couldn't go back." Their kiss as husband and wife felt like a beginning not just of their marriage, but of a new chapter, untainted by fear and pursuit. They departed Denver that same afternoon, their wagon loaded with supplies for their new life. Instead of heading directly north to Wyoming as expected, they traveled east for several days before turning northwest, a precaution suggested by Merritt to throw off any potential pursuers. 2 weeks after their wedding, as autumn yielded to the first hints of winter, they crossed into Wyoming territory. The land was vast and wild, with sweeping plains giving way to distant mountains. When they crested a particular rise and Preston reined in the horses, Fiona knew they had reached their destination. Below them stretched a valley, bisected by a clear stream. A small cabin stood near a grove of cottonwoods, with open grassland beyond that would be perfect for raising horses. "It's not much," Preston said, watching her reaction carefully. "Just 80 acres and the cabin. The previous owner was a widower who decided to return east. James told me about it months ago, and I sent money to secure it, just in case." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain. "We can look for something better if you don't like it." Fiona took in the scene, the rugged beauty of the land, the simple cabin that would become their home, the endless sky above. It was nothing like the life she had imagined for herself in Boston, yet somehow it was everything she hadn't known she wanted. "It's perfect," she said, meaning it completely. "It's ours." Preston's smile could have lit the valley. He jumped down from the wagon and came around to her side, lifting her into his arms to carry her the last few yards to their new home. "What are you doing?" she laughed as he kicked open the cabin door. "Carrying my wife across the threshold," he replied with mock seriousness. "I may be new to marriage, but I know the traditions." Inside, the cabin was sparse but solid, a main room with a stone fireplace, a small bedroom, and a lean-to kitchen. With their supplies and whatever personal touches Fiona would add, it would become a true home. Preston set her down gently, his arms remaining around her waist. "Welcome home, Mrs. Kane." The name, her new name, sent a thrill through her. "Say that again," she requested, smiling up at him. "Mrs. Kane." He brushed his lips against hers. "My wife, my heart." Their kiss deepened, all the emotion of their journey and their love pouring into it. When they finally broke apart, Fiona rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You think we'll be safe here?" she asked softly. "Word came from Denver before we left. Judge Harmon and his son have been arrested. The federal investigation is uncovering corruption throughout Colorado territory. Preston's arms tightened around her. It may take time for the trials, but they won't be able to hurt anyone else. And few people know where we've settled, so we can truly begin again. Yes. Preston led her to the cabin's small window where they could see the valley stretching before them. We can raise horses, build a proper ranch. Maybe in a few years, when the settlement down the valley grows, you could teach again if you wanted. And have a family of our own, Fiona added, watching his face light up at the possibility. That too, he agreed, kissing her forehead. Everything we dreamed of during those nights on the trail. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their land, Preston built a fire in the hearth while Fiona unpacked essentials for their first night in their new home. The simple domesticity of the tasks felt like a blessing after weeks of danger and uncertainty. Later, as they lay together in the narrow bed that would soon be replaced with one large enough for them both, Fiona traced the line of Preston's jaw with her finger. "I never thanked you properly," she whispered. "For what?" he asked, capturing her hand and kissing her palm. "For offering me a different path when I said I couldn't go back. For promising we'd ride anywhere but back." She smiled in the darkness. "For loving me enough to make that promise real." Preston gathered her closer, his voice rough with emotion. "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done, Fiona Campbell. And the most rewarding." Outside, the Wyoming wind sang around their cabin a lullaby for their first night home, the first of many in a life built on courage, justice, and a love born in the wildest of circumstances. 1 year later, Fiona stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Preston worked with a spirited colt in the corral they had built together. The ranch had grown. They now had 6 quality horses, including 2 pregnant mares that would foal in the spring. The nearby settlement of Promise Creek had grown as well, and Fiona had indeed started teaching 3 days a week in the newly established schoolhouse. As she observed her husband's patient work with the young horse, one hand rested unconsciously on her rounded belly. Their first child was due in less than 2 months, and Preston had been alternately ecstatic and protective throughout her pregnancy. News had reached them periodically about the aftermath of their testimony. Judge Harmon had been convicted of multiple crimes and sentenced to 20 years in a federal prison. His son Vincent had received the death penalty for murder, though appeals had thus far stayed his execution. The corruption they had helped expose had led to a sweeping reform of territorial governance in Colorado. Preston finished his training session and released the colt into the paddock with its mother. Wiping his brow, he caught sight of Fiona watching and broke into the smile that still made her heart skip a beat. "How are my 2 favorite people?" he called, striding toward the cabin. "We're fine," Fiona replied, laughing as he placed both hands on her belly to feel the baby's movements. "Your son is particularly active today." "Daughter," Preston corrected with the familiar argument that had sustained them through the winter. "And she's going to be as beautiful and stubborn as her mother. We'll see." Fiona leaned into his embrace, savoring the scent of sunshine and horses that always clung to him. "The Millers invited us for dinner tonight. Sarah wants to show me the quilt she's making for the baby." Preston nodded. "I should be done with the fencing by then." He studied her face, always attuned to her moods. "You're thinking about something. What is it?" Fiona smiled at how well he knew her. "I received a letter from Boston today. My former headmistress is considering a visit next summer. She says she's curious about the woman who traded Boston society for the Wyoming wilderness and seems deliriously happy about it." She paused. "Are we deliriously happy?" Preston's response was to lift her chin and kiss her with a tenderness that still took her breath away. "What do you think, Mrs. Kane?" looking around at the home they had built, the life they had created together. Fiona knew there was only one true answer. "I think," she said, "that I've never been happier that I couldn't go back." Preston's eyes crinkled with the smile she loved so much. "And I've never been happier that I promised we'd ride anywhere but back." Hand in hand, they stood on their porch watching the Wyoming sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, two people who had found in each other not just love, but the courage to forge a new path when the old one had become impossible. And in that moment, surrounded by the beauty of their land and the promise of their growing family, they knew they had indeed found their anywhere, a place that was, simply and perfectly, home.